Natalie Carter never imagined that she would be signing divorce papers while carrying the child of the man she once believed was her forever. Yet here she stood, a manila folder in hand, awaiting her husband's return. After a night with his mistress, billionaire husband Grayson Carter had yet again indulged in the excesses that came so easily to him. A self-made millionaire, he was a powerful force in Los Angeles' elite business circles, straddling the fine line between ambition and temptation. Outside, the pre-dawn sky churned with heavy storm clouds, mirroring the turbulence in Natalie's heart. The fairy tale she had once cherished had crumbled the moment she discovered his betrayal. What followed was a story of heartbreak, betrayal, and a woman's relentless pursuit of her dignity. Natalie had always dreamed of a beautiful life, ever since she was a small-town girl growing up in Oregon. Her world had been simple: weekend barbecues, town festivals, and quiet walks along tree-lined streets. But even in those humble surroundings, she had nurtured a fierce ambition. Determined to create a future for herself, she earned a scholarship to a prestigious university and moved to the bustling city of Los Angeles. It was during her junior year, at an exclusive charity gala, that she first met Grayson Carter. Back then, he was a rising entrepreneur, already making waves in the cutthroat world of high-end real estate. Natalie, volunteering at the event as part of a student program, wasn't part of the city's elite, but something about her caught his eye. Grayson had a presence that couldn't be ignored. His confidence was effortless, his sharp intelligence undeniable. The way he carried himself, the way he spoke, the way he could command attention in a crowded room, it was magnetic. Their romance took off like wildfire. That first year was a whirlwind of candlelit dinners, spontaneous weekend getaways to Malibu, and whispered conversations under city lights. By the time Grayson closed his first multi-million-dollar deal in Beverly Hills, Natalie was at his side, his unwavering partner. She provided the quiet stability that balanced his relentless drive. But even then, the warning signs had been there. Grayson craved the spotlight. He thrived on admiration, the rush of being the most powerful man in the room. His nights were spent at exclusive clubs, rubbing elbows with investors and celebrities, and sometimes coming home with the faint scent of perfume that wasn't hers. Natalie had convinced herself it was just business, that the long hours and secretive phone calls were part of the world he lived in. But as she clutched the divorce papers, she realized she had been lying to herself for far too long. Grayson thrived in a world of power, wealth, and excess. He wooed investors over top-shelf whiskey, attended exclusive galas that stretched into the early hours, and lived for the thrill of closing multi-million-dollar deals. He insisted that networking was essential, that his late nights and whispered phone calls were just the price of success. Natalie had tried to believe him. She wanted to trust that her billionaire husband's relentless ambition was simply part of his nature. But deep down, doubt festered. She had ignored the way his cologne sometimes mixed with unfamiliar traces of expensive perfume. She had dismissed the hurried texts he sent when he thought she wasn't looking. But the whispers at high-profile charity events were harder to ignore. Strangers, women, exchanged knowing glances when she passed, their hushed conversations stopping just as she came into earshot. Still, she had pushed it all aside, focusing on the life they had built. Their wedding had been the kind that made headlines, a grand affair at an oceanfront estate in Malibu, complete with designer gowns, champagne towers, and magazine covers hailing them as the city's power couple. Their honeymoon in Santorini had been equally extravagant, a promise of forever. But forever was crumbling. Grayson's late nights became the norm. The phone calls were no longer hushed but unapologetic. The lies, once carefully crafted, now felt like afterthoughts. Now Natalie sat alone in their penthouse, her 5-month pregnant belly cradled in her hands as the city pulsed beneath her. From the floor-to-ceiling windows, Los Angeles glittered, its light stretching far beyond the Hollywood Hills, the Pacific Ocean shimmering in the distance. It was a breathtaking view, but all it did was magnify her loneliness. The clock neared midnight. He wasn't home. Again. Her best friend, Lily Chang, had called earlier, her voice laced with concern. "Do you think he's okay?" she had asked cautiously, though they both knew what she meant. "Or is he just out again?" Natalie had forced a chuckle, masking the ache in her chest. He's fine, probably in some last-minute meeting with a new investor. But the lie tasted bitter. Because Lily's question had only confirmed what Natalie feared the most. She had spent years pretending the rumors weren't real, that the world wasn't seeing what she refused to admit. But as she sat in the silence of their luxury penthouse, waiting for a husband who had once promised to cherish her, she realized something. She wasn't waiting for Grayson. She was waiting for the truth. The memory surfaced like a sharp blade. 2 months ago, Grayson had stumbled in at nearly 3 in the morning, his suit wrinkled, his tie loosened. He reeked of perfume she didn't own. When she confronted him, his response had been swift and dismissive. This is how deals get done, Nat. Don't be paranoid. She had let it go, told herself it wasn't worth a fight. But deep down, she knew she was lying to herself. Her phone vibrated on the glass coffee table, yanking her back to the present. She grabbed it, half hoping it was him, some weak explanation that would buy him time. But the name on the screen made her stomach tighten. Lily. She hesitated before opening the message. Saw Grayson at Eden Lounge. Not an investor. Be careful. Her hands shook. Lily wasn't one to gossip. If she was sending this, it was because she needed Natalie to see the truth before it destroyed her completely. The baby shifted inside her, pressing against her ribs. As if it knew, as if it was telling her this couldn't continue. A lump swelled in her throat. This has to end. Her fingers curled protectively over her belly. A pregnant wife shouldn't have to wonder where her billionaire husband spent his nights. Slowly, she pushed herself up from the couch and walked across the penthouse, the marble floors cold against her bare feet. In the master bedroom, she opened the walk-in closet. Behind rows of designer bags and neatly arranged shoeboxes, a manila envelope lay waiting. Inside were the divorce papers. She had met with her lawyer days ago, had gone over every clause, every asset division. The only thing missing was her signature. She had prayed she wouldn't have to use them, that Grayson would wake up before it was too late. But that night, alone in their luxury penthouse, she knew the truth. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the private elevator hummed softly, the sound of his arrival. Grayson stepped into the dim foyer, the chandelier casting fractured light across the room. He swayed slightly, running a hand through his hair, his navy suit still crisp, but his expression exhausted. The faint scent of gardenia clung to him. Not hers. He loosened his tie and slipped off his shoes, but when he turned toward the living room, he froze. Natalie stood in the shadows near the grand piano, arms wrapped around herself, her expression unreadable. His polished facade cracked, just for a second. Natalie, he said cautiously, why are you still up? She didn't answer right away. In the soft glow of the city lights, he finally saw the exhaustion on her face, the way she cradled her belly like a shield. A reminder of the child he had claimed to want so badly, even as he had risked losing everything. She hadn't slept. Not really. The hours had crawled by as she sat in the dimly lit penthouse, waiting. Her billionaire husband had lost himself in the arms of another woman, and she had spent the night alone, carrying his child. When Grayson finally walked in, Natalie felt her pulse hammer in her ears. I was worried about you, she said, her voice clipped, her warmth absent. She stood in her robe and slippers, arms folded, her posture rigid like she was bracing for war. Grayson exhaled, slipping into his usual charm like a well-worn suit. Sweetheart, business runs late. You didn't have to wait up. A bitter laugh nearly escaped her lips. Did he really think she was that naive? Who was she? The words sliced through the space between them, sharp and unforgiving. Grayson's confident expression flickered, just for a second. What are you talking about? She stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. Don't lie to me. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with restrained fury. I can smell her perfume. I can see the lipstick on your collar. His mouth opened, probably to offer some half-baked excuse, but one look at her, at the raw devastation in her eyes, and he hesitated. The image of Eden Lounge crashed into his mind. The champagne, the stolen glances, the whispered promises he had no intention of keeping. For the first time he realized there was no talking his way out of this. Natalie saw it too. His silence was louder than any confession, her shoulders squared, her lips pressing into a thin line. We're done, Grayson. His name sounded foreign in her mouth, not like a husband's name. Not anymore. A sharp breath left her as she turned, walking toward the kitchen counter. The weight of the moment pressed against her chest, but she refused to falter. Grayson's stomach twisted as he followed her gaze to the folder lying on the marble countertop. Legal documents. The words petition for divorce were printed in stark black ink. His chest tightened. He had expected this day might come eventually. But not now. Not like this. Her fingers trembled as she held the papers out to him. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. "This wasn't just another mistake," Natalie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is the moment you lost me." Grayson stared at the folder, feeling the full weight of his choices crush him like an avalanche. "Natalie, wait." His voice cracked, desperate now. "Let's talk." But she had already made up her mind. "We can fix this, Natalie. Don't do anything rash." Grayson's voice was raw, edged with desperation, but she didn't flinch. Rash. She let the word linger between them like a bitter taste. "I've tolerated your lies for months, maybe years." Her voice was steady, but her fingers curled against her belly, as if shielding their child from the storm unraveling between them. "I gave you the benefit of the doubt over and over again." She had loved him enough to excuse the late nights, the lipstick stains, the unanswered calls. But love wasn't enough anymore. Grayson's chest tightened as he took in the sight of her. His pregnant wife standing in their luxury penthouse, staring at him as if he were a stranger. He had spent years building an empire from nothing, coming from a modest background and clawing his way to the top of Los Angeles' elite. But somewhere along the way, in the pursuit of power, he had lost sight of what mattered. He took a hesitant step forward, reaching for her, but she recoiled. An unspoken barrier had formed between them, one he knew he might never be able to break. "We can go to therapy," he said, his voice cracking. "Lily mentioned Dr. Carter. She's helped couples before." A sharp, humorless laugh escaped her lips. "It's too late." Her eyes, usually so full of warmth, held nothing but quiet devastation. "You think I haven't asked for these things before? That I didn't beg you to let me in? You brushed me off every single time." The weight of his failures crushed him. He could still remember the countless nights she had waited up for him, hoping he'd come home before sunrise. He had seen the silent pain in her eyes, but convinced himself that his excuses were enough. She turned away, walking toward the kitchen counter where the divorce papers lay. With trembling fingers, she flipped through the pages, stopping at the section that divided their assets and outlined custody rights for the baby. She inhaled sharply. "Sign it. Don't sign it. I don't care," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm filing for divorce." Grayson's mind reeled. He saw it all, the headlines, the business fallout, the whispers at every event. A scandal, a public disgrace. But worse than all of that was the woman he had built a life with standing before him, ready to walk away forever. And the worst part? He knew he had no one to blame but himself. Grayson had spent years negotiating impossible deals, bending people to his will. But now, standing before his wife, he was at a loss. His phone vibrated on the coffee table, its screen flashing with a message. Natalie's gaze flickered toward it, and in that instant, her expression twisted with understanding. She didn't need to see the name. She already knew. A shaky breath escaped her as she willed herself not to cry. "Do you have any idea?" she said, her voice low but laced with fury. "How cruel this is. The worst possible time to do this to me." Her hand rested on her belly, a subconscious act of protection. A pregnant wife should never have to wonder if her billionaire husband is coming home to her or someone else. Grayson took a hesitant step forward, his confidence finally failing him. "I know," he murmured. "I know I was stupid, Natalie. I let everything get out of control. The business, the success, the attention. It consumed me, and I lost sight of what really mattered." She let out a bitter laugh, folding her arms. "Now you realize?" The city lights shimmered behind them, mocking the wreckage of their marriage. "All those nights I waited, all those times I begged you to tell me the truth, and you think standing here, admitting it now, will somehow make it better?" A flicker of something unfamiliar passed through his eyes. Helplessness. "I've destroyed us." His voice cracked, his hands balling into fists at his sides. "I see it, and I hate myself for it." For a moment, something inside her wavered. The old, hopeful part of her, the part that had loved him so deeply, wanted to believe there was still a way forward, that if she let him hold her, they could pretend none of this had happened. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She had learned too much, endured too much, to fall for that fantasy. With a calm she barely felt, she straightened her shoulders. "I don't have any illusions left, Grayson. We're done." The words struck like a final blow. He deflated, his chest rising and falling as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. The penthouse, once their sanctuary, felt like a hollow monument to everything they had lost. The designer furniture, the artwork, the panoramic skyline, it all bore silent witness to their downfall. Without another word, Natalie reached for the divorce papers and closed the folder. Tomorrow, she would take them to her lawyer. She would finalize them. And for the first time in years, she would walk into a future without him. Grayson had finally disappeared into the guest bedroom, though Natalie doubted he had slept any more than she had. By 5 a.m., she had abandoned any hope of rest. Standing by the penthouse's floor-to-ceiling windows, she watched as dawn painted the Los Angeles skyline in soft pinks and golds. The city moved on, oblivious to the wreckage of her marriage. She pressed a protective hand against her belly. Her child would not inherit her sorrow. The weight of the manila folder on the kitchen counter seemed heavier than it was. Every page inside it symbolized the end of everything she had once dreamed of. By mid-morning, she had packed an overnight bag and called a car service. She needed distance, a place where Grayson's presence didn't suffocate her, where she could think clearly. Lily's apartment was nothing like the sterile luxury of the penthouse. But as soon as her friend opened the door, Natalie felt something she hadn't in months: warmth. "Oh, Nat," Lily whispered, pulling her into a tight embrace. The concern in her voice nearly shattered what little composure Natalie had left. The cozy space was cluttered with books, old photographs, and postcards from Lily's travels, so different from the cold perfection she had just left behind. She sank onto the worn-out couch, inhaling shakily. "I couldn't stay there," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I filed for divorce, or at least she would." The papers were ready, waiting for her signature. Lily sat beside her, squeezing her hand. Finally. The word stung, but not because it was cruel. It was true. "I know it hurts," Lily continued gently. "But Nat, you've been hurting for so long. You deserve better, and your baby deserves better." A single tear escaped down Natalie's cheek. "I wanted to believe he could change," she admitted, voice trembling. "That we could be happy. But every time I gave him another chance, he broke that trust all over again." She had spent years standing by her billionaire husband, excusing the late nights, the secrecy, the coldness. She had convinced herself she could love him enough to fix what was broken, but some things couldn't be fixed. Lily nodded, her expression knowing. She had been there through it all. The whispered suspicions, the excuses, the slow unraveling. Natalie wiped her face, inhaling deeply. "I need to protect my baby. That's all that matters now." And as she sat in her best friend's apartment, finally away from the shadows of her old life, she realized she wasn't just leaving Grayson. She was reclaiming herself. Natalie sighed, pressing a hand against her belly, feeling the gentle kick of her child. "I have to protect my baby first. That's all that matters now." Lily gave a reassuring nod. "You can stay as long as you need. We'll figure this out." Natalie exhaled, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. "I need to speak to my lawyer about custody and support. Grayson might try to manipulate the situation." Lily frowned. "You know he will." Natalie's stomach twisted. Her billionaire husband had always known how to wield power, not just in business but in every aspect of life. His wealth, his connections. He had the resources to fight her at every turn. "I won't let him dodge his responsibilities," she said, her voice firm. "But I also don't want my child growing up in a broken home." Her words hung in the air, heavy with conflicted emotion. Lily squeezed her hand. "You've already made the hardest decision, Nat. Now, you just need to follow through." Less than 24 hours later, Natalie found herself standing inside one of Los Angeles' most prestigious law firms, the weight of her decision solidifying with every step. The sleek marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows reminded her too much of the penthouse she had left behind. Cold, powerful, and built to intimidate. She clutched the manila folder against her chest as an assistant led her into a spacious office with glass walls overlooking the bustling city streets. Rebecca Delgado, a sharp-eyed attorney in her early 40s, greeted her with a firm handshake. "Natalie," she said, her voice warm but all business. "I've gone over the preliminary paperwork. Given your husband's net worth, we can petition for substantial alimony and child support." Natalie swallowed the lump in her throat. "I'm not looking to ruin him, but I can't trust him to be responsible, especially financially. My child comes first." Rebecca nodded, folding her hands neatly on her desk. "Agreed. The next step is filing the official petition for divorce. We'll cite infidelity as grounds, supported by any evidence you have." Natalie's thoughts drifted to the late-night messages, the whispered warnings from friends, the photos she never wanted to see. She had never planned to drag her personal life into a courtroom, but she no longer had the luxury of pride. "I have evidence," she admitted quietly. Rebecca's expression remained steady. "Good. It will help. We need to make sure Grayson doesn't try to strong-arm his way out of this." Natalie tightened her grip on the folder. She wasn't just walking away. She was preparing for battle. "I've got a paper trail," Natalie admitted, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "I hoped I wouldn't need it, but here we are." Rebecca nodded, her sharp gaze unwavering. "I'll need full access. Bank accounts, real estate, assets, medical records for the baby. Anything that helps paint the full picture." Natalie swallowed, gripping the armrest of her chair. "That's fine. Whatever it takes." Rebecca leaned forward. "Are you staying with Lily for now?" Natalie wiped away a stray tear. "Yeah. I can't go back to the penthouse. I can't face him." Rebecca's expression softened. "I understand, but legally, Grayson still has rights to the property unless the court orders otherwise. Emotional distance isn't always recognized in family law." The weight of the legal battle settled deeper onto Natalie's shoulders. "So, what do I do first?" she asked. "We file for temporary spousal support and request exclusive occupancy of the penthouse," Rebecca explained. "Given that you're pregnant, we can argue that stability is essential for your well-being. Courts take these factors seriously." Natalie exhaled, her fingers tightening around the manila folder. "All right," she said finally. "Let's do it." She signed the retainer agreement and handed over the official divorce petition. A wave of mixed emotions washed over her: relief, fear, uncertainty. One thing was certain: she was stepping into a war zone, but this time she wasn't defenseless. Meanwhile, back at the penthouse, Grayson paced the polished marble floors, his thoughts spiraling. The apartment was eerily silent, every sound amplified: the hum of the air conditioning, the occasional rush of traffic far below. Even the luxury that once felt like his greatest triumph now seemed hollow. His phone sat on the counter, screen dark, betraying him in its quietness. No messages, no calls. Nothing from Natalie. She was really leaving. By midday, the suffocating silence was too much. He grabbed his phone and dialed a number he never thought he'd need: his attorney. Atticus Chambers picked up immediately. "Grayson?" His voice held a note of concern. "I heard you're dealing with some personal issues." Grayson hesitated, his grip tightening on the phone. "I need the best possible defense in a divorce," he admitted, his voice rough. Atticus was silent for a moment, then sighed. "Tell me everything." Grayson turned toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring at the endless Los Angeles skyline. He had spent years building an empire, thinking it made him untouchable. But in losing Natalie, he was realizing the truth. He wasn't as powerful as he thought. Grayson exhaled, his grip tightening on his phone. "Natalie's pregnant, and she's leaving me," he admitted, his voice strained. "I screwed up, Atticus, but I can't lose everything." There was a long silence on the other end of the call. "Is there any chance of salvaging this without going to court? Mediation? Maybe?" Atticus finally asked. Grayson closed his eyes, an image of Natalie's tear-streaked face burning into his mind. "I wish," he muttered, "but she handed me divorce papers, and she's with Delgado's firm. I know they don't back down on spousal support or custody." Atticus sighed. "Then we prepare for the worst and hope for the best. First, I need a full breakdown of your assets. Properties, bank accounts, stock options. If the court thinks you're hiding anything, they'll rule against you fast." Grayson raked a hand through his hair, a bitter laugh escaping. How many times had he bragged about having his empire in perfect order? Now, it all felt like it was slipping through his fingers. "I'll send you everything," he said tightly. Atticus hesitated. "Be ready for a fight. If there's documented evidence of infidelity, it'll factor into the judge's decision on alimony and custody. The word custody made something twist painfully in Grayson's chest. He hadn't even been there for the last sonogram. Instead, he'd been at Eden Lounge, drinking overpriced whiskey with a woman whose name he barely remembered. Guilt slammed into him like a freight train. "I'll do whatever it takes," he murmured, jaw clenching. "I won't let her think I don't care." When the call ended, the penthouse felt eerily silent, as though the walls themselves condemned him. His eyes drifted toward his phone where Natalie's contact photo stared back at him. A snapshot of her laughing on a beach vacation, the sun glowing on her skin. With trembling fingers, he typed out a message. "I'm sorry. I'm here. Please let me be part of the baby's life." He pressed send, knowing it wasn't enough. At Lily's apartment, Natalie sat at the kitchen table, sipping lukewarm tea. Her phone buzzed and her heart lurched. She picked it up, scanning the message. A mix of emotions churned inside her. Anger, sadness, an odd flicker of something close to sympathy. Grayson's words looked desperate, but she had seen that desperation before. It had never stopped him from making the same mistakes. She carefully placed the phone face down, exhaling. Some wounds couldn't be undone with a text. Natalie placed the phone face down on the table, deciding not to respond. Lily stirred oatmeal at the stove, glancing over her shoulder. "He's not giving up, is he?" Natalie shook her head, rubbing her temples. "He says he's sorry, that he wants to be involved, but I don't know if I can trust that anymore." She let out a heavy breath. "I'm so tired, Lily." Her best friend abandoned the stove, wrapping her in a warm embrace. "It's okay to feel that way," Lily murmured. Natalie rested a hand on her belly, feeling the reassuring flutter of life within her. It was strange how pregnancy could awaken such fierce protectiveness. She wasn't just making decisions for herself anymore. Every step she took now would shape the future of her child. She inhaled deeply. "Rebecca says the next step is formally serving Grayson the papers. She also mentioned a restraining order if he refuses to accept it." Lily's brows knitted together. "Do you think he'd ever go that far?" Natalie hesitated. Grayson had never laid a hand on her, but she'd seen flashes of his temper in high-stakes business deals. He didn't like losing. He didn't like feeling out of control. "I hope not," she admitted, "but I've seen how ruthless he can be in negotiations. This might be no different." A heavy silence settled between them, broken only by the faint sounds of traffic outside. The world carried on at its relentless pace, oblivious to the storm brewing in Natalie's life. Lily sat across from her. "Have you told your mom yet?" Natalie's chest tightened. Her mother, Margaret Carter, lived in the same quiet Oregon town where Natalie had grown up. She adored Grayson, bragged about him to every neighbor. "I can't bear to break her heart," she whispered. "She thought I found my prince." Lily offered a sad smile. "Better to tell her than to keep it bottled up. You could use her support right now." Natalie nodded slowly. She would need her mother's unwavering love to get through the legal battle ahead. For now, she focused on grounding herself. She sipped her tea, rehearsing how she'd stay composed when the real storm hit: lawsuits, property disputes, custody battles. Above all, she vowed never to compromise her child's safety, no matter how remorseful her billionaire husband became. 2 days later, as Los Angeles' unpredictable weather shifted between sunshine and rain, Natalie prepared for the next step: serving Grayson the papers that would sever their marriage for good. A heavy downpour turned Los Angeles sidewalks into shimmering rivers, but Natalie was determined to keep her prenatal appointment. She clutched a black umbrella, navigating the wet pavement carefully, her heart pounding harder with each step. Grayson had once attended these appointments with her, at least in the beginning, but that was before everything fell apart. Now, she was on her own by choice, and she forced herself to steady her nerves as she stepped through the automatic doors of the hospital. The bright fluorescent lights, the murmur of receptionists checking in patients, it all felt jarringly normal. She gave her name at the front desk and sank into a chair, ignoring the occasional curious glance from strangers. She knew why they stared. Her billionaire husband's fall from grace had been splashed across headlines for weeks, their once envied marriage reduced to tabloid gossip. "Miss Carter?" A nurse called her name, slightly mispronouncing it in haste. Natalie exhaled sharply. She might not even carry that last name for much longer. In the exam room, she settled onto the cushioned table, waiting for Dr. Naomi Carter. The familiar setting should have been comforting, but today it only amplified her loneliness. The door swung open. Natalie's stomach dropped as Grayson stepped inside behind Dr. Carter. "I apologize for the surprise," the doctor said, her voice professional but kind. "Mr. Carter insisted on attending today's appointment. He said you might have forgotten to inform me otherwise." Natalie's pulse quickened. She swallowed the initial shock, forcing herself to remain calm. Grayson stood in the doorway, drenched from the rain, his suit slightly disheveled, an unusual sight for a man who prided himself on perfection. His blue eyes, once so confident, were pleading. "I just wanted to make sure everything's okay with the baby," he said softly. "Please let me stay. I won't argue, I promise." A storm of emotions crashed into her, fury at his audacity, resentment for showing up unannounced, inserting himself back into her life. And yet, a tiny flicker of something else, a distant memory of how excited he had once been, eagerly awaiting their first ultrasound. She met Dr. Carter's gaze, uncertain. "It's entirely up to you," the doctor said gently. "I can ask him to leave if you prefer." Natalie's heart pounded in her chest. She inhaled sharply, then gave a small, reluctant nod. "He can stay," she murmured, her voice tight. Grayson exhaled in visible relief and took a seat near the exam table, folding his hands in his lap. Dr. Carter proceeded with the routine checks, measuring Natalie's belly, as Grayson sat silently, watching the life they had created. Dr. Carter checked Natalie's blood pressure, asked about any discomfort, and noted updates in her file. Throughout it all, Grayson remained uncharacteristically silent. His gaze flicked between Natalie's face and the fetal heartbeat monitor, his usual confidence replaced with something unfamiliar: vulnerability. Then, the room filled with the rhythmic whooshing of their baby's heartbeat. Natalie's throat tightened. No matter how much betrayal stood between them, this was their child, and the sound was undeniable proof of the life growing inside her. She glanced at Grayson. His eyes glistened, and for a brief moment she saw it. A flicker of paternal joy, of what might have been if things had been different. But as soon as the exam ended, her resolve returned. She pulled her coat tighter around her, preparing to leave as quickly as possible. Grayson had intruded on her space, and no matter how genuine his remorse seemed, she refused to let him pull her back into his orbit. Dr. Carter offered a polite nod before stepping out, leaving them alone. Natalie swung her legs off the exam table, moving swiftly toward the door, but Grayson blocked her path. Not aggressively, just enough to signal he wasn't ready to let her go. "Thank you for letting me stay," he said, his voice low, as if aware of the bustling hallway outside. "I know you didn't have to." She avoided his gaze, adjusting the zipper of her coat instead. The tension in the room was suffocating. "Don't read too much into it," she said coolly. "I just didn't want a scene." He nodded, a flicker of sorrow passing over his features. "I get it. But Natalie?" He exhaled sharply, searching for the right words. "I'm not fighting you out of anger or revenge. I'm fighting for us because I can't imagine my life without you and our baby." A sharp pang shot through her chest. Her lips parted slightly, her breath unsteady. But then the anger, hot and unforgiving, pushed its way to the surface. "You couldn't imagine life without us?" she repeated, her voice shaking. "Then why did you risk everything for one night with someone else, or however many nights it was?" Grayson flinched. He had never been the type to cower, but in that moment he looked small. "I was weak," he admitted, his voice raw. "It was an ego boost, a stupid, selfish thrill, but I never stopped loving you." Natalie placed a protective hand over her belly. "You have a strange way of showing love, Grayson." She brushed away the tears threatening to spill. "Let's stop pretending you can fix this with an apology and one doctor's appointment. I've already started the divorce process. You'll get the papers soon enough." Grayson's face fell, his damp hair disheveled as he raked a hand through it. Each breath came out unsteady. "What if?" He hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if we tried counseling? I'll do anything. I'll cut back on work, drop the late nights, shut out the toxic crowd, whatever it takes." Natalie's stomach twisted. Her mind flashed to all the nights she had spent alone in their penthouse, waiting for him to come home. The ignored calls, the hollow apologies in the morning, the way she had convinced herself he would change once the baby arrived. She met his gaze, her voice tight. "I asked for therapy months ago." Grayson swallowed hard. "You laughed, told me we didn't need a stranger telling us how to fix our marriage." His blue eyes glistened with regret. "I was a fool," she exhaled sharply. "You still are if you think I can forget what you did." Brushing past him, she stepped into the bustling hospital corridor. The rhythmic beeping of monitors, the hurried footsteps of nurses, the hushed conversations of anxious families, it all felt painfully normal compared to the emotional storm inside her. Grayson called her name softly, but she didn't turn back. He was no longer part of her decisions. Back at Lily's apartment, Natalie shut herself in the spare bedroom, flipping through the legal documents Rebecca Delgado had sent over. Each page reinforced her reality. A formal petition for divorce, affidavits detailing Grayson's infidelity, financial disclosures mapping out his vast net worth. A lump formed in her throat as she stared at the paperwork. Sorrow, resolve, anxiety. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. Lily peeked inside, her voice full of quiet concern. "Are you okay?" Natalie set the papers aside. "No," she admitted, "but I'm doing what needs to be done." Lily stepped inside, settling beside her on the bed. "I overheard you tell Dr. Carter that Grayson showed up at the appointment. That must have been hard." Natalie nodded, her fingers gripping the hem of her sweater. "He's begging for another chance, saying all the right things, less work, no more late nights. Everything I asked for months ago." Lily sighed. "Some people only realize what they had once it's gone." Natalie let out a quiet, bitter laugh. "He realizes it now, but it's too late. I'm tired." Lily, a pregnant wife, shouldn't have to fight for her billionaire husband's loyalty. Lily wrapped an arm around her, offering silent comfort. For the first time in a long time, Natalie felt at peace with walking away. "You won't be alone in this," Lily assured her. "We'll figure out a plan for you and the baby, I promise." Just as they pulled apart, Natalie's phone vibrated on the table. The caller ID showed a familiar number from her hometown. Her mother. A lump formed in her throat. She had been dreading this conversation. She glanced at Lily, who gave a silent nod of encouragement before she answered. "Hi, Mom," Natalie said, her voice unsteady. Margaret Carter's warm greeting quickly shifted to concern as Natalie hesitated. There was no way to soften the truth. I have something to tell you about me and Grayson." As Natalie explained, her voice trembling, her mother's shock was palpable, even through the phone. "How long has this been going on?" Margaret asked, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you say something sooner? Is there any chance of working things out?" Each question struck like a fresh wound, another reminder of how much she had kept buried. By the time the call ended, her mother was crying. "Come home, sweetheart," she pleaded. "We'll figure this out together." Natalie swallowed hard. "I'll think about it," she promised, though the idea of leaving Los Angeles, the city she had fought so hard to make her own, felt impossible. After she hung up, she sank against the wall, tears slipping down her cheeks. The weight of her mother's disappointment, the avalanche of legal decisions, the uncertainty of her baby's future, it all crashed over her at once. Lily gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Storms never last forever," she said softly. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, echoing the turmoil in Natalie's heart. And yet, through the grief, she clung to one undeniable truth. She was free. Free to build a life without deception. Free to step into the unknown, no matter how terrifying it seemed. 2 weeks passed. Los Angeles remained unchanged, fast, relentless. But for Natalie, everything had shifted. She had settled into a routine at Lily's apartment. Morning walks to ease her pregnancy aches, afternoons spent reviewing legal briefs with Rebecca Delgado, evenings curled up on the couch, her mind bouncing between worry and anticipation. Rebecca had scheduled a mediation session, a required step before finalizing the divorce. A chance for both parties, along with their attorneys, to negotiate outside of court. Natalie's emotions were mixed. She dreaded facing Grayson again, but if this meant closing the door on their past for good, she was ready. On the morning of the mediation, Natalie stood in front of the mirror in Lily's bedroom, smoothing down the fabric of her navy maternity dress. It was simple, professional, offering both comfort and quiet confidence. She placed a hand on her stomach, exhaling slowly. A gentle kick pressed against her palm, as if reassuring her. "We'll get through this," she whispered. At the mediator's office, a sleek, minimalist suite in a downtown high-rise, Natalie arrived with Rebecca. The receptionist led them into a spacious conference room with a glass table and black leather chairs. The massive window overlooked the bustling Los Angeles skyline, a reminder that life continued, indifferent to personal wars. Grayson was already seated on the opposite side of the table, his attorney, Atticus Chambers, beside him. He stood when he saw her, a flicker of hope and regret passing through his eyes. She didn't meet his gaze. Instead, she focused on placing her purse neatly on the chair, anchoring herself in small, deliberate actions. The mediator, Daphne Morales, a composed woman with years of experience in high-profile divorce cases, began the session. Respect, honesty, a genuine willingness to negotiate, she stated calmly, setting the tone. Rebecca spoke first, laying out Natalie's terms. Divorce on the grounds of adultery, emotional neglect, and the need for financial security for both mother and child. She requested substantial alimony, child support, and exclusive occupancy of the penthouse for a year after the baby's birth. Grayson's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't interrupt. When Atticus responded, his voice was measured. He acknowledged Grayson's infidelity, but downplayed it as a momentary lapse, urging Natalie to consider reconciliation. Then came the counteroffer. A reduced alimony period, a more modest child support package, and shared custody. The words slammed into Natalie like a physical blow. Shared custody. She pictured a crib in one home, then another. A baby too young to understand why he was being shuffled between two lives. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Each hour crawled by as offers and counteroffers were exchanged. Several times, Grayson attempted to speak directly to her, but Rebecca firmly redirected him back to the process. The tension in the room was suffocating, broken only by Daphne's steady voice, guiding them toward compromise. By late afternoon, a tentative agreement emerged. Grayson would provide a substantial monthly support sum. Natalie would stay in the penthouse for a year. After that, the property would be sold and the proceeds split. It wasn't everything she wanted, but it was a step toward freedom. Grayson pushed for joint legal custody, wanting a say in every major decision regarding their child. The thought made Natalie's stomach twist. She knew their baby deserved a father, but the idea of constantly negotiating parenting choices with a man who had repeatedly betrayed her trust was suffocating. They left the mediation drained. No final agreement reached, but at least the framework of a settlement had taken shape. Inside the elevator, Natalie exhaled shakily, leaning against the cool metal wall. She felt as if she had run a marathon, physically, emotionally, mentally. "This is just the beginning," Rebecca cautioned, adjusting the stack of legal documents in her arms. "But the fact that they're negotiating is a good sign." Natalie nodded, placing a protective hand over her belly. For the first time, she glimpsed an end to this emotional battlefield. Whether Grayson would honor his promises or manipulate the system remained to be seen, but one thing was certain. She would never again sacrifice her dignity or her child's well-being for the sake of her billionaire husband. Over the next month, negotiations continued through an exhausting cycle of emails, phone calls, and in-person meetings. Each revised draft of the divorce settlement inched them closer to resolution. One neither side was entirely happy with, but both could tolerate. Grayson, however, still clung to the hope that through these interactions he could change Natalie's mind. But every time he tried to make it personal, to remind her of their past, to plead for another chance, she calmly redirected him back to the legal process. This was not marriage counseling. One crisp morning, Rebecca called. "We have a date for the final hearing," she announced. "Next week, we'll go before the judge and finalize everything." Natalie's breath hitched. Relief flooded her. Soon, the limbo of her failing marriage would be over. Yet, deep down, a familiar sadness bloomed. This wasn't how she had pictured her family's story. She had never imagined being pregnant, alone, negotiating custody and property settlements. But sorrow didn't change necessity. She needed to protect her child from a toxic cycle of broken promises. The morning of the hearing arrived, gray and drizzly. Natalie dressed carefully, choosing a black maternity dress that was both elegant and strong. She wanted to look composed, to exude quiet resilience before the court. Lily accompanied her, offering silent support as they arrived at the courthouse. a towering neoclassical structure with grand columns, its cold facade mirroring the tension in her chest. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken words. Grayson sat at the opposing table, Atticus beside him, their expressions unreadable. A handful of onlookers, curious bystanders, a couple of reporters, watched intently. The end of her marriage was about to become official, and for the first time, she was truly ready. Reporters lined the courtroom benches, their gazes sharp with anticipation. Natalie took her seat, ignoring the flutter in her stomach, a mixture of nerves and the baby's gentle kicks. The judge entered, and the room rose in unison. What followed was a series of formalities, statements from both attorneys, confirmation of identities, a review of the proposed settlement. Natalie kept her focus on the judge's measured voice, refusing to glance at Grayson. The terms were laid out: alimony, child support, custody rights, property division. A hush fell over the courtroom. The judge turned to Grayson. "Mr. Carter, do you agree to these stipulations?" For a brief moment, fear tightened in Natalie's chest. Would he change his mind? Fight her one last time? Grayson cleared his throat. His blue eyes flickered toward her, full of emotions she didn't have the energy to decipher. "I agree, Your Honor," he said, his voice quiet. The judge nodded, turning to Natalie. "Miss Carter, do you concur with these terms?" She exhaled, relief and heartbreak tangling inside her. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice steady. "I do." The gavel struck the wood. With that single motion, the legal dissolution of their marriage was set in motion. A bright flash burst from a reporter's phone, capturing the final moment of a once-envied union. The judge closed the proceedings and exited the bench, leaving Natalie and Grayson to navigate the crowded hallway. For the first time in what felt like forever, she met his gaze. Pain was there, raw and undeniable, but they had chosen this road, he through betrayal, she through self-preservation. A solitary tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away before it could fall. Then, without another word, she turned and walked toward the exit, each step a reclamation of her future. 1 week later, Natalie Carter's divorce was officially recognized by the court. She woke in Lily's apartment to a crisp, sunlit morning, a feeling of finality settling deep in her bones. The burden of the past had lifted. Yes, she was still pregnant. Yes, there were challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, she felt something new, possibility. She moved through the apartment, making a simple breakfast of toast and orange juice. Lily had already left for work, leaving behind a handwritten note on the counter. Natalie smiled softly, holding the paper between her fingers. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning again. A handwritten note of encouragement sat on the kitchen table, left behind by Lily before heading to work. Natalie smiled at her friend's thoughtfulness, then opened her laptop to check emails. The new notification from Rebecca popped up, confirming the final court filing and attaching the signed judgment of divorce. It was done, really done. Her phone buzzed, drawing her attention. A message from Grayson. "I know the marriage is over, but I'd like to be at the next prenatal appointment. Let me know if that's possible." She hesitated, emotions swirling. The settlement had granted him the right to participate in major pregnancy milestones and eventual co-parenting. She could hear the regret in his words, but trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. After a pause, she typed her reply. "The appointment is next Thursday at 2 p.m. If you want to be there, show up. I won't stop you." She hit send, inhaling deeply. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about their child. If Grayson truly wanted to be involved, she would allow it, but only under her watchful eye. As the afternoon passed, she searched online for apartments closer to her old neighborhood. The divorce settlement had left her financially stable, giving her options. A quiet brownstone in Brooklyn had its appeal, with tree-lined streets and a sense of community that had drawn her in years ago. But then, there was the thought of returning to Oregon, back to her childhood home, a simpler, more peaceful place to raise a baby. For now, she had choices, and that alone was enough. Later that evening, she curled up on the couch, nibbling on fruit slices as she flipped through a baby name book. She traced her fingers over a few names that stood out: Adeline, Sebastian, Eliana, Jude. Each name carried weight, a possible future, a new chapter written on a clean slate. She smiled softly. This child would grow up surrounded by love, free from the shadows of broken promises. A wave of gratitude washed over her. Yes, she had endured betrayal. Yes, she had fought through heartbreak and legal battles, but standing on the other side of it all, she had reclaimed herself. A pregnant wife should never have to rebuild her life after being betrayed by her billionaire husband. But Natalie Carter did. Her story reminds us that even the most dazzling love stories can crumble when built on deception. But resilience? That's what writes a new ending. Thank you for joining Natalie's journey, her fight for dignity, her battle for independence, and her unwavering love for the child she carries. If this story of love, betrayal, and strength resonated with you, support us by liking this video, sharing it with friends who appreciate gripping real-life dramas, and subscribing to our channel. Your engagement helps us bring you more powerful stories. Stay tuned, because every ending is just the beginning of something new.